Hi, and welcome to InfoSec Pros. I'm Kayne, the field CISO of Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Varun Prasad, Managing Director at BDO. Welcome to the show, Varun. Because it's a live stream, if you've got a question for Varun or a question about BDO or about Hyperproof, please do drop it in
Thanks
the
for having me on.
comments. You're glad to see it here. Please drop your questions in the comments on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we'll take these as we go. Today, we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and ISO 42001. And because that's a pretty big topic, I want to start with some foundational questions first. So, help our audience understand what is ISO 42001 and what are the key components of it?
Sure. So ISO 42001 is the most recent standard that was published by ISO in late December of 2023. It includes a lot of guidelines for the governance and management of AI technologies. It includes controls and requirements to address some of the unique risks, challenges, and issues that come with implementation of AI. So this can be used by companies across different domains and industries and different sizes. It can not only be used by companies who are making or building AI based products and services, but also by companies who are actually using or deploying AI as a part of their internal operations as such. From a structured perspective, if you're familiar with other ISO standards, yeah, this is structured in a very similar way uh, to the whole ISO family as such. Includes a set of mandatory requirements or what they call mandatory clauses, and also a list of controls that companies have to choose and implement based on what is applicable for their environment.
Okay, and that sounds pretty useful. But let's hear it from you because you've done this, not just me suggesting that it might be useful. What would be some of the benefits that a business could have from getting an ISO 42001? Well, also have to clarify: is it a certification? Is there an ISO 42001 certification? If so, what are the benefits?
Yeah, that is correct. So this is a certification, and that's one of the biggest benefit. This is the first of its kind AI related standard, and probably the only one as we speak that a company can certify themselves against. Um, Look, companies are starting to use AI in various different ways. But they're getting a lot of questions. They're getting questions from their enterprise customers and consumers as to what are some of the guardrails and what are some of the safeguards around these technologies. How does company identify key risks around bias and ethic related questions? So that's where having a standard like ISO 42001 comes into picture, because this allows companies to demonstrate to their customer base that they do have a strong system of controls in place to address some of these unique risks. It helps build trust with your customers and enhance confidence with any of your stakeholders. So, to me, this really is the biggest benefit. You can have a lot of responsible AI principles out there, but actually obtaining a certification, which is done by a independent third party auditor, actually helps you show that you're walking the talk. These are not just principles you published out there, but you're actually following them in spirit. Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned risks there, and I know like the Security and Exchange Commission has posted their 2025 examination priorities, where AI risk is certainly of interest to them. I think New York Department of Financial Services last month in October, they put out a letter. It's not a requirement yet, but they're certainly interested in it. Um, I bet, knowing the team over at ISO, that they probably have written some stuff down here. So, do they have any written requirements for AI risk or impact assessments in ISO 42001?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I mentioned, any ISO standard, requires you to perform a risk assessment. But however, because of the criticality and the far-reaching impacts of AI-based technologies, this standard is a little bit more intense. It goes one level deeper. What I mean by that is, in addition to a traditional or a typical risk assessment, this standard requires you to also perform what's called an impact assessment or a system impact assessment. Let me just take a quick minute to explain how does an AI system really look, or what it really means for some of our viewers here. Yeah, so on the right extreme, you see this green box, which is basically the AI model. That is really the core of the system. That really contains the logic, which is really driving a lot of the magic that happens out here. Um, there is a set of standard data, what is called training data, and the model is constantly learning based on the training data out here. And then, depending on how a specific uh, system or product is being used, or how AI is actually being put to use, uh, it's going to receive a set of inputs. So once it receives a set of inputs, based on what it learned from these training data, it's going to come up with a set of outputs. And then again, the users of the system would consume these outputs in various different ways based on what the objectives of the system are. Also, another thing to consider is how these users of the system would be impacted by the outputs of the AI. So this is really at a high level what an AI system is. Now, coming back to what the standard is asking us to do, risk assessment in the perspective of the standard refers to more macro level risks. When I say macro level risk, these are more organizational level risks, where the C suite and the board would really be involved. This includes trying to understand and define the objectives of AI for the company. What are the different ways in which the company can use AI or should use AI? What are the do's and don'ts? Is the organization ready to use AI? What's the complexity? Do you have the right hardware? Do you have the right software? Something that I think of at a macro level. And impact assessment, what we looked at, is something that's going to happen at a micro level or at a system level. So what we're going to consider, when we talk about impact assessment, is how the consumers or the users of the system would be impacted by these outputs of the AI system. So that's really what happens. So that happens at a much more granular, microscopic level. It happens at an application level, or maybe even at a model level. You can really go as deep as you want to. But yeah, that's like broadly the key differences. Risk assessment is more macroscopic, happens at the organizational level, but impact assessment is something much more granular. We got to think about the impact of every single use case of every single model, uh, because one company can have four different applications. It might be using AI in four different ways, or you have one large product suite, but AI is used to drive different capabilities or features of the product in multiple ways as such, right? So the impact would really vary from a model to model and a use case to use case basis.
Okay, well, you brought up some really good questions there to follow on about, because as you're talking about the ways that organizations can use artificial intelligence, I can't help but notice the different approaches that we're seeing in the European Union and in APAC, as opposed to domestically here in the United States, where it's still on a state by state basis. Somebody mentioned to me just the other day that Utah apparently has got a state level AI act, and I missed that one. I didn't know they'd done that. And I think that's one of the challenges we have, is we're seeing this increasingly patchwork way of approaching regulatory and legal demands associated with AI. And that's on top of all of the existing things associated with user privacy, like GDPR, which is extraterritorial and affects a lot of folks in unanticipated ways, as well as state level privacy laws. So, how does ISO 42001 fit into that larger compliance strategy, particularly when we're talking about legal requirements and we're trying to still not stifle innovation associated with the use of AI?
No, these are like really really great questions. It's becoming increasingly difficult to keep track of the different AI regulations that coming up. You mentioned Utah. I saw something from Kentucky more recently. But I get this question a lot. Folks really ask me, if I implement 42001, does that mean I'm going to be in compliance with EU Act? Does that mean I'm going to meet Colorado's requirements and things like that? um, the answer is, it just depends, or not really. 42001 includes a lot of baseline requirements, but over and above that, it really depends upon how strongly the controls are designed and the quality of implementation. However, I think implementing ISO 42001 is a great starting point. uh, because as we speak, there aren't too many benchmarks or reference frameworks out there for AI governance. Companies want to do the right thing. They're all looking to implement a system of controls. They're looking to implement some governance principles around AI, but they don't know where to start from, or where to go from. So under such circumstances or such a scenario, I think the 42001 serves as an excellent starting point. It's a great base, a solid foundation that companies should uh, begin their compliance journey with. Because I believe once you have a solid foundation or a solid base, depending on the unique requirements of a specific state or even a specific country, it's just all about considering and implementing what I call those incremental controls to meet a specific state's requirement or a specific country's requirement as such. But I'd like to think 42001 as your foundational base framework. Once you have this, the journey is going to become really easy. And it's going to give you a lot more confidence in your ability to meet any requirements that's going to keep coming up by the month.
Okay, and I want to remind our audience as well at this point, this is a live stream. So if you have a question for Varun, or if you have a question for me, please do drop those in the chat on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we'll get them and we'll take them live and on the air. And Varun, as you were speaking, I did see an audience question come in, but I just want to go to something first, real briefly. ISO 42001 is one of many, and you were talking about controls and building strong controls. If a company's already got let's say an ISO 27001 certification, which everyone in cybersecurity just talks about quite a lot, and some companies even have. Is that going to help them? Are they going to be able to reuse some of the controls that they have there in place with artificial intelligence, or is this water and oil and they just have to start over?
I think it's somewhere in between. I don't think they're completely far apart. At the same time, there isn't too much of an overlap. Um, Having said that, companies who already have a ISO certification, be it 27001 or a 9001 in terms of a quality management system, can develop what is called an integrated management system. So, which means certain requirements of the standard, like uh, doing the macro level risk management can be common at the company level, where you probably need to consider some nuances for AI, but it can still be a one time, like a single common exercise. The management review process can be similar. And then when you come into policies, I believe your organization would have already a lot of policies from a cybersecurity and privacy perspective. So it's just a matter of trying to see how to expand them, or rather enhance them, to include some of the specifications and some of the nuances that AI really brings in here. So what I really tell people is that, again, having 27001 is a great starting point, which means you already know what is ISO and what are the requirements of ISO. But again, just because AI is so different, and AI has so many nuances and so many unique aspects to it, there is a little bit of additional work required on top of what you already have to meet the specific controls of 42001 as such. Yeah.
Okay, now I want to bring in that audience question and double click on this one just for sake of clarity here. And the audience question is what challenges could organizations face in aligning their controls with ISO 42001 and how can they be addressed? And I want to just add a little more on that. Like if you talk to folks these days, they've all got their SOC 2 Type 2, many have their ISO, some of them claim that they have NIST certifications, and I sure would love to see those because they don't exist. But what are the challenges that companies are going to have in actually aligning their controls back to ISO 42001? Is it a big gap analysis that has to happen first, and then what happens next?
Um, Definitely, yes. A gap analysis needs to happen. Like I said, uh, having a SOC 2 or having a good foundational base from a cybersecurity perspective is a good starting point. But a traditional cybersecurity or privacy related certification does not look into aspects like bias, ethics, or transparency and reliability kind of factors. These are all unique aspects or unique factors that we are now starting to think because of what AI can do or what AI can bring in. So even though there might be a strong system of controls, uh, I mean, it's difficult to put a number or quantify that,
Hmm.
but there is going to be a little bit of handful of extra controls or handful of extra effort that will be required on top of what we already have to meet the requirements of 42001. Uh, because I think data management, data governance, all of these become very important and cornerstone of our AI management system. So I don't think some of these traditional controls would already be there as a part of SOC 2 or as a part of 27001. So for sure, there will be a little bit of an incremental effort. And to your point, yeah, a gap assessment is probably the best way to start. Again, having any of these other certifications is a good starting point. I think from a, to again go to the specific question, from a challenges perspective, organizations need to define their scope. They need to define what are their AI objectives. AI is a broad field. Actually, it's a broad field. It has so many different use cases and applications. So what are the specific ways in which a company wants to start using AI? And then start small and continue to build on that is how I usually recommend people. Yeah.
Okay, that does help. And I want to thank the audience for submitting that question. Again, if you've got questions, please do drop them in the chat on LinkedIn or on YouTube. We will be taking those questions live. And Varun, I want to go back to something you said there. You were talking about bias, and you were talking about transparency. And like, I know, some of our software developers know you can audit code for security, right? You can audit code for vulnerabilities. You can audit code for privacy problems. I don't think it's feasible at this point in human history to audit code for algorithmic bias. And we were talking about risk management. So, and that's beyond, like, I think ISO 42001 goes beyond privacy and security. So from your viewpoint, how's ISO 42001 going to help organizations in those more nuanced risks, like preventing algorithmic bias or discriminatory outcomes, or making sure that they have adequate transparency that could stand up in court if necessary?
Great point. Yeah. So I think probably go back to that impact assessment that I spoke about. So in order to drive some of these impact assessment, I think we would have heard about the NIST RMF framework, the NIST AI RMF framework. So that provides a lot of guidelines and starting points on how do you drive this. So yeah, again.
Yeah, but it's a bit hand wavy, wouldn't you say? Like the NIST document, I think the biggest complaint people have on it is that it's not very prescriptive.
Absolutely, yeah. That is not very prescriptive, and I think that's 42001 does include a system of prescriptive set of controls that companies can take and implement. Again, maybe not all of those controls would apply based on a company's use case or based on how a company is using AI. Uh, yeah, one good thing about, as I mentioned earlier, is that 42001 does come with a set of controls or a control library, if you will, and some of these controls are prescriptive in nature. So which means uh, you could actually go through them and see what really matters. So there are controls around data governance which are very important in order to help us address any risk related to bias. Now there are controls around monitoring or logging that will help us probably address some of the risk related to transparency or explainability. So that's what I was referring to, some of these newer types of controls which you would not find in your NIST cybersecurity framework and things like that. That is going to help us address these newer challenges and newer issues that AI is coming to fore. Yeah.
Okay, I think that helps. And we do have another audience question as well here. And I want to thank Joe or Joseph for submitting this. And the question is, if a company was looking into getting ISO 42001 certified, I'm sure, Varun, you might be able to help with that, actually. But what do you think? This is good because you do this stuff for a living, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think the most significant challenge or certification for most companies is going to be? Like, what's your number one thing that you've seen?
Again, you want to identify your scope. So once you have identified your scope, I think scoping is, it might seem trivial or easy, but that's one of the areas where companies are struggling. uh, because there's a lot of ways in which they are using AI, so you want to define and nail down on your scope. And then when it comes to controls, I think data governance and data management strategy is very important. A lot of companies who are doing good work in analytics probably have a strong data governance plan and a strong data governance policy. If not, data governance plan is some of the key thing. And I know Kayne probably be going to talk a little bit more about some of the different controls that's included in the 42001 framework. But yeah, just to answer the question, I think the verification and validation of your AI models, I think to me that's the biggest challenge.
Hmm.
One single biggest challenge, like if I look at the entire control set or control library in 42001, and if I have to pick like what's the biggest challenge in all of these controls from an implementation standpoint, I would think it's about verifying and validating your model before deploying it into production. I think that is going to be a very difficult, tough ask, mainly because as you mentioned, there's not a lot of guidance out there for companies to reference or benchmark against. It's really going to be up to an organization to determine, define, and document specifically how are you going to validate a model, what are the
Hmm.
different testing techniques are you going to use, when do you become comfortable, and when do you know enough the testing is sufficient or enough. So that's one area a lot of companies, I wouldn't say are struggling with, but it's being a big question as such. Yeah.
Okay, I want to go back to a word you've used a couple times here, and I want to get absolute
Mhm.
clarity on the word. And the word you've used is scope. And I say that because on one of my other shows where I drink beer, we talk about FedRAMP, and I'm not saying that I enjoy the beer, and it helps with the FedRAMP for sure. But scoping is a very big part of FedRAMP, and now with CMMC 2.0 becoming effectively the law of the land in the next 6 months ish, I guess, 6, 8 months. Scope is important there. And I've done scope work too with other CUI related DoD work where scope means the system scope, the scope of here are all the components that are in the box, and maybe you have an enclave and it's magically outside your firewall boundary or inside its own like network segment, and here's everything that's outside of the box. But AI, you keep saying, is different. So is AI scoping literally just the inventory of here are all the bits that make up our AI, or does it include more?
um, yeah, again, scoping is very interesting from an ISO standpoint. So usually when you go do an audit, the scope is basically an application or a department or a team or something like that. But like I said, AI is actually so vast. Companies are using AI in several different ways and several different areas as such. So that's why scope becomes critical. To
Hmm.
your point, scope in this context can even be a single model. I can say that there is one single baseline model, foundational model that my company has. This is the foundational model that's driving several different use cases or several different features. So the model, your scope can be as simple or granular as even a single model, or it
Hmm.
can be a set of features or a single feature of an application, or it can be an application, or it can be a department. So you just think about it, you can just start building out, right? So that's really the
So
beauty
it
of
sounds
the
like
standard.
scoping is though really a hard part of this more than anything
Hard
else.
part of
Because
this.
I mean, I hate to say it that like a CMMC 2.0 scoping exercise might be less painful, but at least you can say here are the bits that process CUI, and this is where everything lives, and here, this is nothing shall pass outside of that. It sounds like the usage of an application, like if you've got, I don't know, let's say you're using a call transcript service and it has an AI doing a call transcript. That could, in theory, be a scope. Is that a fair assessment, just at the smallest, simplest level that our viewers can jive with?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that
Cool.
that
All
that
right.
can that can be a
All right,
scope.
so
Yeah,
it can be use cases too, then, how people use it. We have two more audience
definitely.
questions, and then eventually I think I had some questions, but this is fun. We're getting a lot of audience engagement. Love it. Please keep dropping them in the comments. Varun's a smart guy. We're lucky to have him on, so let's ask him interesting questions that's been on your mind. Question from, I am going to butcher your name, Gayatri? Sorry. People call me Kanye, though, so I know the problem. With AI technologies evolving rapidly, how does ISO 42001 stay relevant? Ooh, I like this, and be able to adapt to future developments in AI? Ooh, future-looking question. That's a good one.
Wow. That's a very tough question. Yeah, so actually, I mean, the standard does have a set of controls, right? So these control statements are pretty generic. It is basically a requirement. It does not talk about uh, technology, or the control statement does not include anything around the technology or the tool or the application as such. So the control statement is really going to be generic, and based on how a company is implementing it, they will have to interpret it. They can either use the same control statement, or a company can come up with their own set of customized control language, if you will, to meet the requirement. Yeah. So even though AI or the technology part might develop, I think the requirements and the controls are pretty generic in nature, and based on the specific technologies we use, the specific tooling we use, companies can always interpret it in different ways and customize it as per their own language to meet that. And again, maybe quick note on ISO is that I believe every 5 to 6 years, ISO does review their standards, and they keep changing it or enhancing it just to make sure it's really relevant in terms of what the industry and market needs are at that point of time. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that does help. And so the control statements are fairly broad. Control application, of course, is where it gets specific. We have a question from Lucas. Thank you, Lucas. The question is kind of on the other side of that. So, can product teams expect the audit process and timing to be similar to other ISOs like 27001? Or I love that Lucas brought in 9001, which you don't hear enough about these days. Or are there any significant differences there?
No, yeah, thanks, Lucas. Great question. I mean, yeah, from a audit process perspective or a timing perspective, it's very similar to 27001 and 9001. Because you brought these items up, I think that you're probably familiar with the ISO audits and you've undergone a few ISO audits. Uh,
You can hear
so
the
you,
scars in the text.
I know. So to use that example, yes, the first time you're going through it, you're going to have what's called a stage one audit, which is more of a documentation review and trying to understand the environment. And then you have a more detailed stage two audit, wherein we actually start testing controls and start looking at how you've actually implemented some of these requirements. Yeah, and the timing should be very similar to what you probably experience with some of these other ISO audits. Yes.
Okay, and because we're talking about controls, I want to double click on that one as well. I see there is another question in the audience. We're going to get to that in just a moment, but I want to drive for clarity on controls because AI governance is getting harder, right? Things like roles and responsibilities really do help make sure we've got effective oversight and that those controls are being observed. What are some of the challenges, though, that you've seen in defining those specific controls and making sure that there is adequate oversight over AI, which is, I believe, a part of ISO 42001?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. So, yeah, having the right roles and responsibilities, making sure we have the uh, personnel with the appropriate skill set and competencies to work on some of these complex areas is a very key requirement, or in fact, a mandatory requirement of the 42001 standard per se. In fact, the standard requires companies to document not just the key personnel and roles, but also goes a little bit more deeper into some of the tooling, the software needs, and hardware needs. So the way companies have been managing AI governance to provide oversight is kind of interesting. There are many different flavors I'm seeing in the industry. It really depends on the current maturity level of an organization, the culture of an organization, if you will.
Hmm.
In a lot of companies, I've seen that the CISO organization or probably the GRC team has been added additional responsibilities to take care of AI related controls and AI related governance. In some companies, it's actually the privacy team, the privacy governance team, or the privacy operations team. They are also taking on responsibilities to go ahead and talk to engineers and implement AI. But in some of the more larger and mature organizations, yeah, they have created what you call a responsible AI function, or what you call an AI governance function, which is basically a cross functional, a team of cross functional experts coming in from product, engineering, legal, ethics, HR, and different teams, and they work with different stakeholders across the groups to ensure that controls are implemented in place and things like that. Yeah, again, like I said, depending upon an organization's culture, how they currently operate. I know I want to say that I've also seen companies where their data analytics team or data governance team is given the responsibility to drive this oversight to function and things like that. But yeah, what is absolutely critical is having board oversight. I think the role of the board of directors or the role of the board becomes very much more critical uh, with AI coming into picture, and because of the far-reaching consequences of AI as such. So for sure, having board oversight and having that level of leadership commitment and support is absolutely key. But again, on the ground level, to drive some of these controls, to drive some of these impact assessments that we talked about, yeah, it again, it done differently in different organizations, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, you've brought up some interesting things that I want to double click on. Board oversight, obviously, that's interesting to me. Also, privacy and large organizations, that could be fun. But we do have another audience question, and I want to thank our audience. Please keep dropping these in the chat. That's the best part of this, as opposed to me making up questions on the spot. So this question comes from Sanjana, and the question is, what are some of the methods for conducting a gap analysis to identify the areas of non-compliance with ISO 42001 standards?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. So, a gap assessment is also what we call the readiness assessment in the audit world. So, this is basically, we take the 42001 standard requirements and set of controls in the 42001 as a starting point. We try to talk to an organization, try to understand what policies they already have in place, what processes they have in place, what are the existing controls that may already be out there, and compare it with, and try to probably map it with, if I want to simplify it, try to map it with or compare it with what are the control requirements that the standard requires you to have in place. And that's when we determine where exactly the gap is. Uh, and and the ultimate goal of this exercise is to make sure, if a company is really ready to get 42001 certified. If not, we provide a set of recommendations in terms of what are those controls or what are those uh, additional items that they'll have to put in place in order to meet the requirements. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you. And again, to our audience, thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. I want to rotate back on the topic of board oversight, and a brief story of mine. You occasionally see people on LinkedIn who post that they just got a certification as a person who can talk to a board member. I know there's actually a genuine certification that you can pay money to go get, and it even has paper. A buddy of mine went and got it just as a laugh. And one of the things that they found out is that board members, when they take this training, they emphasize the idea of plausible deniability, where if they're not briefed, if they're not aware, they can't be accountable, or it's very hard for them to be held accountable for that. Now, I will admit, for those of you who are tuning in from Delaware, the Chancery Court of Delaware would love to have a conversation with you, and it's not going to be a fun conversation. But outside of that, what's the motivation for a board to really get involved here? Are you aware of any regulatory or legal obligations that companies have right now that say a board member has to be up on AI?
um, no, so to my knowledge, there isn't a legal requirement or regulatory requirement yet that says a board member should be involved in this. But I'll tell you a couple of reasons why a board member has to absolutely be involved. Because we've seen that the different ways in which companies can use AI. Um, it can directly impact your profitability and your ability to be marketable in the market. Because we've seen a lot of companies who come up with AI based product, um, but because of a lack of the right controls in place and because of lack of oversight, uh, some of the users have either taken the companies to court. They've ended up paying a lot of fines and penalties, or some companies have also had to shut down maybe an entire business unit or entire product line based on AI. And that's because these products were not built with the right controls in place, the right questions were not asked. So yeah, the way you use AI has a direct impact on your profitability, your brand reputation, and goodwill in the market. That's the first one. And the second one, as we spoke a few minutes earlier, there are just so many new laws and regulations that's coming up, right? So depending on the jurisdiction in which a company is operating, a company is bound to comply with some of these laws and regulations. So as a board member, you do have some fiduciary responsibility in that perspective to make sure that the company is actually in compliance with all the laws in the region or jurisdictions they're operating. So to me, these are two really big reasons why board members should get involved. Because if you're using AI as a part of an application or feature and something really goes wrong, your share price, your profitability, your marketability, a lot of this would definitely have a direct impact. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. And just as a standard disclaimer at this point, neither Varun or I are attorneys.
Yeah.
At least I don't. I know I'm not. You're not, right? Too?
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Neither of us are attorneys. This is not legal advice. Please go talk to your counsel about anything that you hear on this podcast, because they probably know more than we do. But I want to go back to the topic of jurisdictional topics. Something that I keep seeing about AI is ultimately it all comes back to GDPR, which is just the gift that keeps on giving. Like for a while there, we thought GDPR was just we needed to email people that they'd have a cookie banner. And then eventually we needed to give people terrible cookie banners. And then we needed to make a Chrome plugin that clicks through those terrible cookie banners. And that isn't what the intent of GDPR was. And knowing that it's an extraterritorial provision that says, look, if you've got, or if you're processing EU member state of a citizen's data, you need to be able to follow some things, including right to be forgotten. And I know that that probably affects training data, or it also probably affects user interactions with AI. Does ISO 42001 give companies some way of helping with the privacy requirements under GDPR, or is that something that's held separate?
So I think privacy is inherently involved with AI. I think any discussion about AI is incomplete if we don't talk about privacy. Uh, but having said that, the 42001 standard in itself does not include any privacy specific control or a privacy specific requirements. But however, to your point, a specific company's privacy obligations or privacy commitments significantly change or significantly impacted if they are starting to use AI. And that's why
Hmm.
I said that if we speak about AI, privacy is kind of part of the same sentence, and we do really need to consider the risks as such. Again, privacy is a vast topic, and AI, the use of AI can impact privacy requirements or privacy controls in several different ways. But probably there are two quick things that I can touch upon. One, yeah, as you said, training data. Training data is a very important piece for any AI system. So the training data that is being used, uh, we need to have the appropriate consent, and it needs to be collected based on lawful basis as such. We hear of many companies using web crawlers, which is going and scrubbing random data from multiple websites, and we hear that's being used for training. I don't think that's a very good privacy practice. So from a privacy perspective, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate consent and it's collected the right way.
Hmm.
Secondly, like you mentioned, data subject rights. That is very, very key. Um, in an AI system, personal data can be in multiple places. Yes, it can be a part of training data. You can have metadata, which is part of some AI monitoring system. You can have probably some personal data which is as a part included as a part of your model output. So whenever we have a request from a user, uh, for data deletion or from a right to be forgotten perspective, we want to make sure that data is actually scrubbed and deleted from all of the different sources. So in order to do that, uh, having a log or account of your data is very, very important, right? Like you collect data from your source. As a part of training data, you want to have an account of what really happens to the data through the life cycle, so that whenever you receive right to be forgotten request, we can ensure that data is actually deleted from all of the different sources. Another quick thing that I'd like to touch upon, I talked about consent. In the context of consent, users can also opt out. Like, for example, I can go to a specific website and I can opt out from my personal data being used for a training purposes. So for, let's say, for a company, there are a bunch of users who want to opt out from their personal data being used for training. So how does the company keep track of that? How do you track of all the opt out requests and make sure that the personal data of those specific subjects or those specific individuals are actually carved out or actually kept away from your larger training data set as such? So these few items are, I believe, some of the key privacy related challenges that companies are trying to solve. And I'm sure this is an evolving topic, an evolving area. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of privacy engineering techniques or PETs that's going to come across in the days to come. So that's why, the whole field of privacy engineering and privacy operations as such has become much more complex, busy, and interesting with the advent of AI, I'd like to think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you are right in that there's a lot of gray in this area. Like what I'm thinking of is the European CJEU Central. What is that? Central Court of Justice. Anyway, Court of Justice of the European Union. That's it. They recently got shouty at the Dutch. The Dutch, basically, the Dutch court said, look, if it's not written in the law, it is not a lawful reason to process data under GDPR. It has to be written down. And the CJEU said, no, actually, it doesn't have to be written down for it to be a legitimate interest, provided you've got a lawful interest and provided that whatever processing you want to do is going to be necessary to meet the business's objectives, and that the DSR, the data subject recipients, going to be their rights are not going to be infringed upon. You're not overly compromising their privacy, but I don't think this is black and white yet. I don't think it is settled law for how companies should process data of EU citizens under the GDPR. And I think this is one where it's I wish ISO 42001 maybe had more answers for us in this space, because it is hard, right? There's not really an easy way of managing those risks.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like I said, though privacy is one of the AI related principles that NIST is calling out, if you look at an AI governance framework like 42001, I'm sure there's more out there. There are no privacy controls embedded as a part of this framework. But however, we just, our privacy obligations of a company would significantly change or would significantly be enhanced because of the different ways in which AI is being used. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about AI lifecycle, and you were talking about scoping. We were talking about the various risks that are going to show up as from like smallest model to the enterprise model. Does ISO 42001 support managing risks across an AI lifecycle, like from creation of the model to model validation? And if it does, like, do those controls align with broader regulatory demands for transparency and accountability?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one very good
I love
facet
that you've
of
got a picture for
42,000.
this one too.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah. So yeah, let's probably go through this picture, right? So this is nice. This is the OECD's definition of an AI system lifecycle as such. These are the various different phases or various different activities that really happen in an AI lifecycle. You start with the planning and designing, and then you go through to retire or decommission the model. The reason I wanted this picture out there is 42001 does have specific controls which align with literally every phase or every phase in the life cycle, or with every box that you see on this picture. Now, starting with design, it is absolutely critical to have a robust architecture and robust design which meets the requirements of the original use case, or which aligns with the company's larger AI related objectives. And then secondly, I think collection and processing data. This specifically talks about the training data that we alluded to in our earlier discussion. um, I mean, for lack of a better example, I'm going to use the same cliche of garbage in, garbage out. Uh, the accuracy or correctness of an AI model is directly dependent upon the quality of training data that we use. So there is an entire module or set of controls, I would like to say, in 42001 around your data management and data governance practices. It talks about identifying the right kind of data sources. You want to make sure that you're selecting the right type of data that is relevant, data that has the correct attributes as a part of your training data set. And then secondly, once you identify the data source, the data preparation and data cleaning is something very, very important, because the original raw data would include a lot of errors, a lot of erroneous records or unnecessary fields and things like that. And then last but not the least, staying with data strategy, the key thing is data quality. I think controls around data quality is very, very important. I mean, I know we had a question earlier about some of the challenges, right? So, control implementing controls around data quality is another challenge that I believe companies would have, because this is a key control for us to ensure that there is really no bias, because the training data set that we use should be diverse, inclusive, and representative of the entire consumer base or user base. We want to make sure that the various types of users who would be interacting with the system are actually represented in the training data set. So that's why data quality is very, very important. um, Moving on, yeah, as a part of again development, we are aware of secure coding or secure development practices. From a cybersecurity perspective, the same considerations apply here as well. Even while developing a model, we want to make sure that secure coding practices are used. Similar to software supply chain attacks, the code here could be susceptible to what's called a model supply chain attack. So that's why controls around secure coding of models is very, very important. And then, yeah, bang, right in the middle of the picture is the whole box on testing of models. So like I said, model verification and validation is sort of like a gray box. There are different best practices and out there in terms of what are the types of testing or types of validation that really needs to happen. I'm not going to dig deep into it right now. That's not the focus of our discussion. But yeah, again, it's really important for companies to determine early in the game what type of validation, what type of testing you're going to do. And then once the model is tested, the next step is deployment. So during the deployment strategy, um, we've heard that humans need to be involved in the AI development, right? These days, with a lot of automated CI/CD pipelines and automated CI/CD processes, uh, because of the risks of AI, it's important to what they call human in the loop. So human in the loop is a key control, and I really think that at the deployment phase is where a human really needs to be involved, to make sure and control the deployment, and also to roll back and take back any of the features that did not go well. So in the deployment process, having human involvement and human oversight is very, very critical, because of the risks and dangers of AI, if you will. Again, coming to the right extreme of the picture now, once an AI model is deployed, we need to continue to monitor it. I know we talked a little bit about monitoring earlier as well. So, monitoring an AI model is very important to see and catch any errors, any mistakes, or anything really going wrong in the system. So, the strength of the monitoring processes is very, very important in the context of AI, more than any traditional application as such, if you will. And then, yeah, last
Okay.
but not the least, yeah, it gets done. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to double click on that one around monitoring. But before then, we have an audience question, and you kind of talked a little bit about it. So, what implications does ISO 42001 have for supply chain management?
Um, yeah, again, you know, where is AI being used in supply chain management? I think if that's the question, it really depends on that. So on AI, so in a supply chain model, or in as a part of your supply chain processes, way. And depending on that, I think that's where 42001 really helps you manage the risks around that. Yeah.
And I think you might have broke up a bit there, Varun. Could you just say that one more time for the audience question about the implications of ISO 42001 for supply chain management? I don't know if it's like software supply chain or traditional supply chain with like cranes and forklifts and whatnot. But what does ISO
Yeah.
42001
So
have to say
again,
about it?
yeah. So again, to your point, yeah, from a software supply chain perspective, the traditional risks of a software supply chain does apply to 42 for an AI model development as well, because there are a lot of third party libraries and third party code that can be leveraged as a part of it. So 42001 does not have a specific requirement for software vulnerability management or for software supply chain. Control wordings are quite generic.
Hmm.
Um, so you do have processes for secure coding and secure development, and that's where I've seen companies uh, include various types of model scans and model library scans and things like that to take care of that. Yeah.
Okay, but it's not inherent in ISO
Correct.
42001
There is no
process.
inherent
Okay,
requirement that I
that's
need to
good to know.
scan my code as such. Yeah.
It's probably still a good idea, though, I think, coming from a security background. I want to double click on, you were talking about monitoring towards the right side of the picture there. And like, I think monitoring your AI is probably just one bullet point on some index slide of some appendix of a board level deck that maybe somebody asks you about, but companies are really looking for holistic metrics and KPIs, key performance indicators that link back to KRIs, key risk indicators that are actually meaningful to the business leaders. Are you seeing anything in companies that have adopted ISO 42001 where they're making a more holistic measurement of their use of AI? And that could be things like, I don't know, the number of security incidents or user feedback to get a more comprehensive lens on how effectively their organization is using AI?
No, absolutely. I think monitoring in the context of AI has a completely different meaning. It's a different connotation, if you will. Here, when we talk about monitoring and when we talk about typical KPIs, we are looking for specific parameters like accuracy of the output, precision of the output, what is the reliability of the output. uh, we are looking for specific metrics like bias, uh, algorithm drift and things like that. So just like how you have like SIEM tools or a cloud security posture monitoring tools, in the world of AI or for the context of AI and models, there are several exclusive model monitoring tools as such. So I've seen companies actually start to invest and implement specific model monitoring tools, or even if you're using an existing platform or an existing uh, security posturing monitoring tools, those companies are actually coming up with newer versions wherein they are starting to look at AI observability metrics and things like that. Yeah. So monitoring in the context of AI is really much more um, deeper, because you are tracking and looking for specific clues. Like I said, is there a drift? What is the consistency of the output? Let's say, is my algorithm giving me accurate output 10 out of 10 times, or is it only 8 out of 10 times? And various different things that you're trying to do. In this context, another thing I'd probably also like to mention is, again, there's not a lot of reference data out there to see that what's the best practice or what's a benchmark to go against. So companies are actually trying to uh, take a library of metrics out there and refine it to see what's the best one for their environment as such. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to follow up on something you said there. So on background, I run a CISO roundtable for about 100 friends, and something we talked about was AI governance tools. And a lot of my friends who were CISOs at some fairly large companies as well as some startups, a lot of them have looked at the AI governance tools, the AI monitoring tools, and when they've pulled back the covers, they've said there's just not a lot of there. Like it seems very, it's either very hand wavy conceptual or it's pre-seed stage companies, or it's very like they're trying to call CPSM to be AI monitoring. Are you saying you've actually seen legitimate tools that can effectively help a company manage and monitor their AI system health beyond like the standard gauges of like, hey, we're running out of GPUs, or hey, we're running out of disk space, but actually monitoring for compliance or for risk associated with the use of AI?
So I've seen tools that track metrics like accuracy, drift, and bias. But
Okay.
again, I'm not going to say if, those companies are good enough, or are they good. But to
That's
your
encouraging
point,
though that you're seeing that they're existing. Like you're providing a different view than I heard from everyone I know.
correct. Um, Again, I'm not taking a specific company or vendor's name, but another popular thing I'm seeing is people use AWS SageMaker. AWS SageMaker is a managed AI modeling service from Amazon. It's a AWS service. So AWS SageMaker comes with certain inbuilt monitoring capabilities or certain inbuilt services for monitoring. So for companies who are probably not confident or not able to invest in implement any AI specific tools, I know a lot of them are actually using AWS SageMaker's managed services to monitor AI. So I believe that can really be a starting point because, I mean, as we know, a lot of companies are on the cloud, and anyway, their infrastructure or their environment is hosted on AWS. So it just makes it easier for them to make use of another AWS service called AWS SageMaker, and that's something they're using. But yeah, when we talk about specific AI monitoring tools as such, most of them are like, yeah, still early stage startups and yet to make a big name. But again, come on, this is a very very evolving field.
That's
It's
true.
continuing to grow. Yeah, so there's not much. Yeah.
All right, final quick question for you. If people want to know more about ISO 42001, where can they go to find out more?
Sure, I think the 42001 standard as such, it's a paid thing out there from ISO. But however, uh, from BDO we have a lot of thought leadership. I know BDO and Hyperproof are collaborating to come up with some kind of an ebook that customers can leverage, which gives a complete breakdown and a detailed understanding of the different clauses and controls that's going to be there in the 42001. So yeah, these are really good resources. Folks can refer to and get started with. Yeah.
Fantastic. Really love that. And with that, I want to thank you for being on the show today, Varun. If you're watching this out there and you know somebody who we should have on the show, or alternatively, if you're that person who we should have on the show, drop a note in the comments or just DM me directly on LinkedIn. With that, Varun, I really want to thank you again for joining us and sharing your knowledge. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in today's live stream. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kane.